Marcus sat in his apartment at 11 at night, staring at his laptop screen. He had been in the same marketing role for 4 years. Competent, reliable, safe. His salary was predictable. His future was predictable. Everything about his life was perfectly, symmetrically balanced. He made decent money. Not extraordinary, but enough. He took calculated risks, not too much, not too little. He dreamed about starting something of his own, but the math never worked. If he left his job, he'd lose his income. If he started a business, it might fail. Both paths seem to ask the same question. Are you willing to lose everything? So Marcus did what millions of people do. He stayed. He waited for the perfect moment. He told himself that one day, when he had saved more money, when he was more experienced, when the market was better, then he would move. Someday. But not today. What Marcus didn't understand was that he was trapped by a single invisible assumption. He believed that to win big, you had to risk big. That ambition and safety were opposites. That you had to choose between security and growth. This belief was so natural, so obvious, that it never occurred to him to question it. But across the country, a woman named Catherine was making a different kind of decision. Catherine was also in marketing. She also had a stable job and real responsibilities. But Catherine had learned something that changed how she approached risk entirely. She understood what most people never learn, that the choice between safety and ambition is a false choice. Catherine's breakthrough came from watching how the wealthiest people she knew actually made decisions. She expected to find recklessness. She expected to find people who had gambled everything on a single bet. Instead, she found something completely different. They thought in terms of asymmetry. They asked themselves questions like, what is the smallest commitment I can make to test this idea? What is the maximum upside if I am right? What do I actually stand to lose? And crucially, how do I ensure my downside is capped while my upside is unlimited? This way of thinking produced a completely different life. Catherine began building things, small things at first, a side project that took 5 hours a week, a skill she developed in her spare time, a network she deliberately built while keeping her job. None of these things required her to quit, to go all in, or to risk what she had already built. But here is what almost nobody realizes about this approach. It is not conservative thinking. It is not playing it safe. It is the opposite. Asymmetrical thinking is the most aggressive strategy available to anyone who wants to build something significant. It just does not look aggressive because it does not require recklessness. Most people see risk and opportunity as locked together. You cannot have one without the other. Take bigger risks, get bigger rewards. Take small risks, stay small. This is the logic that keeps them paralyzed. They are waiting for the moment when they feel safe enough to act boldly. That moment never comes. But the people who eventually break free from this trap learn to separate these concepts. They learn to think enormous while risking minimal. They learn to stack small advantages instead of betting everything on one big moment. They learn to see risk the way a professional investor sees it, not as a single all-or-nothing decision, but as a portfolio of small edges, each one designed to have a positive expected value. The asymmetry habit is not a lucky break. It is not inspiration. It is a specific way of making decisions that certain people have learned and others have not. And the strange part is this: it is learnable. It is not tied to how much money you have, how much education you received, or how much luck you have had. It is a habit, a pattern of thinking, a framework for seeing opportunities that other people completely miss. Over the next hour, we are going to explore exactly how this thinking works. We are going to look at why most people organize their lives around symmetry when asymmetry is what creates real separation. We are going to understand the psychology behind why successful people think and risk so differently. And by the end, you are going to see your own decisions through an entirely new lens. But first, we need to understand the trap that most people never escape. Because before you can learn to think asymmetrically, you have to understand why symmetry feels so safe, so logical, so obvious. You have to understand why it is the default for almost everyone. The human brain evolved to seek balance. In nature, balance meant survival. Too much of anything was dangerous. Too much risk meant death. Too little caution meant exposure. The animals that survived were the ones that found the middle ground. They were neither reckless nor paralyzed. They distributed their energy across multiple survival strategies. Avoid the lion, find water, gather food, rest, sleep, repeat. This instinct runs deep. It is not something you learned in school. It is something your nervous system knows at a cellular level. And for most of human history, this instinct was adaptive. It kept us alive. But here is what changed. Our circumstances changed, but our thinking did not. When the stakes were immediate and physical, symmetry made perfect sense. A man deciding whether to hunt near dangerous territory could not think in asymmetries. If he risked his life, he risked everything. The downside and upside were proportional because they had to be. But modern life is not like this. The stakes are different, the math is different, and yet we carry forward this ancient logic as if nothing has changed. Most people approach their careers the same way they approach everything else, symmetrically. They give 8 hours to their job and keep the other hours for themselves. They put money in their savings account and money in their living expenses in equal measure. They take one vacation a year. They spend their free time on hobbies that are genuinely enjoyable but lead nowhere. They network a little. They learn a little. They try a little. They rest a lot. And they wonder why they never seem to get ahead. The logic is seductive because it feels balanced. It feels mature. It feels like you are being responsible. You are not being reckless. You are not obsessing about work. You are maintaining perspective. You are being well-rounded. You are healthy. And in a world where most people operate this way, being symmetrical is exactly what it takes to be average. Think about a lawyer who splits her energy equally between her job and her personal life. 8 hours at the firm, 8 hours with family, 8 hours sleeping. On weekends, she decompresses. She does not think about work. She turns her phone off. She maintains these neat boundaries because boundaries are healthy. 20 years later, the lawyers who built something, who developed a specialty, who became known for something specific, who invested their asymmetrical energy into building a reputation or a practice, these people have 10 times her income and 10 times her options. But here is what almost nobody realizes. The lawyer who stayed balanced did not fail because she was unlucky. She failed because the game itself rewards asymmetry. The game does not care about your balance. The game cares about value creation. And value creation requires an asymmetrical allocation of resources. The trap of symmetry is that it feels safe. It looks responsible. It passes every reasonableness test. If someone asks you why you are splitting your time equally, you have answers. Balance, health, sustainability, perspective. These are all culturally approved reasons. No one criticizes you for boundaries or work-life balance. Everyone nods approvingly. But what if the real cost of balance is invisibility? What if what feels like wisdom is actually a form of self-limitation? Ask yourself honestly, what do you notice about the people in your life who have built something significant? Do they maintain perfect symmetry? Do they balance work and personal life in equal measure? Do they take it easy on weekends? Do they turn their work off completely when they are not being paid? No, they do not. The most successful people you know are asymmetrical. But they are asymmetrical in a specific way. They do not take massive risks. They do not bet the farm. They do not work 80 hours a week on something that might fail. Instead, they do something more intelligent. They take small risks that have enormous upside potential. A software engineer spends 3 hours a week building a side project that costs nothing but time. 3 hours. That is asymmetrical, tiny time investment, potentially unlimited upside. A consultant develops a specific expertise in a narrow area of her field. She reads obsessively about this one thing, while others read broadly about everything. Her downside, she is behind on other topics. Her upside, she becomes invaluable in her niche. A young businessman builds relationships with 5 people who are 5 years ahead of him. This takes minimal time. But if even one of these relationships leads to an opportunity or a piece of advice that changes his trajectory, the upside is enormous. The downside is negligible. He spent some time having coffee. These are not reckless bets. These are asymmetrical bets. And most people never make them because they are still operating under the assumption that to win, you have to risk proportionally. That if you want a 10 times return, You have to put in 10 times the energy, or 10 times the money, or 10 times the risk. But that is not how the modern world actually works. The modern world is built on leverage. Information leverage, network leverage, skill leverage. You can invest a small amount into these things and unlock returns that are totally disproportionate to your input. But you have to think asymmetrically to see these opportunities. You have to be willing to look foolish by committing energy to something that might not work. You have to be willing to appear imbalanced to someone who is still thinking symmetrically. This is why symmetrical thinkers stay stuck. They see the person doing the side project and think, that is inefficient. They see the person specializing and think, that is limiting. They see the person building an unusual network and think, that is time I could spend with people I actually know. They are not wrong. These things are less comfortable, less balanced, less immediately rewarding, but they are asymmetrical. And asymmetrical bets are how the world actually changes. The ceiling created by symmetrical thinking is invisible. You do not see it. You just see yourself as reasonably successful, reasonably happy, reasonably balanced, and you are. But reasonably is not exceptional. Reasonably is the default, and the default does not compound. The question you have to ask yourself is not whether you want balance. Of course you do. The question is whether you are willing to be asymmetrical about achieving that balance, whether you can think differently about how you allocate your resources, whether you can see that the people who end up with the most freedom and the most options are the ones who are willing to be asymmetrical about building something valuable. What comes next changes how most people think about risk entirely. There is a specific behavior pattern that shows up in almost every person who eventually builds real financial independence, career advancement, or significant personal achievement. It is quiet, it is easy to overlook, and it looks nothing like what most people expect when they imagine successful, ambitious people. The pattern is this: they think in asymmetries, not unconsciously, not accidentally, but deliberately and repeatedly. They have developed a habit of asking themselves a specific set of questions before they commit to anything. And these questions have nothing to do with whether something is a good idea. They have everything to do with the ratio between what they stand to lose and what they stand to gain. Let us define this clearly, because the definition matters. The asymmetry habit is a decision-making framework where you deliberately structure your choices so that your potential loss is small and defined while your potential gain is large and unlimited. You cap your downside, you leave your upside uncapped. This is the opposite of what most people do, which is either cap both or risk both equally. Think about the difference between 3 different approaches to learning a new skill. A symmetrical thinker might take a course. One course. She pays $1,500. She commits 12 weeks. If she gets value, great. If not, she has lost time and money and learned a lesson about courses not being for her. The downside and upside are roughly proportional. She risked $200 and 12 weeks. She might gain a new skill. A reckless thinker might decide to quit his job and spend 6 months learning full-time. He risks his entire income and his career momentum to become an expert in something. The downside is catastrophic. The upside might be enormous, but he has removed the safety net. An asymmetrical thinker does something different. She might spend 3 hours a week for 3 months teaching herself the skill online using free resources. The cost is time only. Time she would have spent scrolling or watching television anyway. 3 hours a week is asymmetrical because the downside is minimal. She has not spent money. She has not quit her job. She has not disrupted her life. But if this skill opens a door, if it leads to a conversation, if it changes her career trajectory, the upside is unlimited. This is the asymmetry habit in its simplest form. Here is what almost nobody realizes about this approach. It requires more discipline, not less. It is easier to go all in. It is easier to make a dramatic choice and commit to it fully. The hard part is making small commitments repeatedly. It is easy to quit your job to pursue your dream. It is hard to wake up at 5 in the morning and work on your dream for 2 hours before your real job starts. But the small commitment is asymmetrical. It caps your downside. It does not eliminate your ability to change course. It does not destroy your financial security. It does not make you a dependent of luck or investor capital. It makes you dependent on your own judgment and effort. The asymmetrical thinker understands something crucial. You do not need permission to experiment. You do not need perfect conditions. You do not need to be sure. You just need the ratio to be in your favor. Small downside, unlimited upside. A man named David applied this to his career. He was a project manager at a mid-sized company. Decent salary, no clear path to advancement. Instead of waiting for a promotion or jumping to another company, David did something asymmetrical. He started writing. Long-form analysis of project management problems. He posted it on LinkedIn. He spent 4 hours a week on this. His downside was 4 hours of free time. His upside was potentially unlimited. For 6 months, nothing happened. His posts got modest engagement. He was tempted to stop. This feels like a waste of time, he thought. But the downside was so small that it did not matter. He could keep going indefinitely because the cost was minimal. Then something changed. A recruiter saw his writing. She was impressed by the clarity of his thinking. She did not recruit him for another company. Instead, she invited him to speak at a conference. At that conference, he met someone who offered him a consulting opportunity. That consulting opportunity led to connections. Those connections led to a book deal offer. The book led to speaking engagements. The speaking engagements led to opportunities he could not have predicted. His asymmetrical investment of 4 hours a week eventually returned exponentially. But notice what would have happened if David had thought symmetrically. If he had demanded that his writing either produce immediate results or he would quit. If he had needed permission from someone else before he started. If he had needed guaranteed success before he committed. He would have never started. He would still be waiting for a promotion in a company with no clear path forward. The asymmetry habit changes your relationship to time itself. Instead of hoarding time, you deploy it. Instead of requiring certainty, you require favorable odds. Instead of thinking, will this work out? You think, what is the math on this? And here is the thing about math. It does not care about your feelings. It does not care whether you are afraid or confident. It just cares about the ratio. Small cost, large potential return. That ratio is positive. That ratio is worth playing. This is why the asymmetry habit is so powerful. It is not motivational. It is not about positive thinking or visualization or believing in yourself. It is about cold mathematics. It is about structuring your choices so that even if you are wrong most of the time, the few times you are right pay for all the times you are wrong and then some. A venture capitalist understands this intuitively. She invests in 20 companies knowing that 18 will fail, 1 will break even, and 1 will return 10 times the investment. The math is simple. As long as 1 winner can pay for 18 losers, the strategy works. She does not need all companies to succeed. She just needs the ratio to be favorable. Most people live their lives the opposite way. They need everything to work out. They need every decision to be correct. They need certainty before they commit. This requirement for certainty makes them paralyzed. Because certainty does not exist. The future is always uncertain. But the asymmetrical thinker does not require certainty. She requires favorable odds, and favorable odds are everywhere. Most people simply do not see them because they are still asking the wrong question. They are asking, is this guaranteed to work? When they should be asking, what is the ratio between my downside and my upside? Think about that question for a moment. Once you start asking it, you begin to see opportunities everywhere. You begin to see how to test ideas cheaply, how to build skills without needing permission, how to access networks without waiting for an introduction, how to position yourself for opportunities you cannot yet see. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop requiring perfect conditions. You stop asking for permission. You start asking, what is the smallest commitment I can make to find out if this is real? And that question, asked repeatedly over months and years, is what separates the people who build something from the people who stay stuck in symmetry. But there is a deeper psychology at work here, because understanding the asymmetry habit intellectually is one thing. Actually believing in it enough to act on it is something else entirely. The difference between the person who sees risk and the person who sees opportunity is not intelligence. It is not access to better information. It is not luck or background or education. The difference is how they have learned to perceive risk itself. Most people perceive risk as a single entity. You either take it or you do not. You either go all in or you stay safe. This binary framing is the source of their paralysis, because real risk is not binary. Real risk is layered. It is complex. It is something that can be engineered, managed, and controlled. But most people never learn to see risk this way. They see it the way their nervous system evolved to see it, as a predator. You either face the predator or you run. You either confront the risk or you avoid it. There is no middle ground. This ancient framing creates modern paralysis. Here is what separates someone who has built real success from someone who has not. They have learned to disaggregate risk. They have learned to separate the different kinds of risk and assess them independently. Consider a woman named Eleanor who wanted to start a consulting business. When she thought about the risk, she felt overwhelmed. Starting a business is risky. What if nobody hires me? What if I fail? What if I lose my savings? What if I destroy my reputation? All of these fears collapsed into a single mass of anxiety called risk. And because risk felt massive and undifferentiated, she paralyzed herself. She could not move forward. Then something shifted in how she thought about the problem. Instead of asking, "Is this risky?" she started asking, "What are the specific risks and which ones can I control?" Financial risk. She could start part-time while keeping her job, eliminating the financial risk of lost income. Market risk. She did not need to launch with a full service offering. She could test a narrow service with a small number of clients first, de-risking whether anyone wanted what she offered. Reputational risk. She could do early work at reduced rates for people who would give her honest feedback and referrals, turning risk into relationship capital. Skill risk. She was already doing this work. She was not learning something new. She was just packaging what she already knew differently. This risk was nearly zero. By disaggregating the risk, Elena realized something startling. The actual risk was not massive. The risk was manageable, specific, small. Most of the fear came from bundling all risks together into one amorphous mass labeled starting a business. This is how the asymmetrical thinker perceives risk. Not as a single phenomenon, but as a portfolio of separate, manageable risks. And once you see risk this way, your options explode. A young programmer named James wanted to learn artificial intelligence. His symmetrical peers had two options. Option 1, pay for an intensive boot camp, leaving their job to attend. Option 2, forget about it because it is too disruptive. Both options framed the risk as all or nothing. James disaggregated the risk differently. Technical skill risk, he could learn the basics for free using online resources. Opportunity risk, he did not know yet if this skill would open doors, so he was not going to commit huge resources to finding out. Career risk, he was not going to sacrifice his current job. Time risk, he committed 5 hours a week, which was small enough that he could sustain it indefinitely, even if it led nowhere. By separating these risks, he realized he could commit to learning without committing to a career pivot. He could test whether this skill actually interested him before making a big move. He could build competence gradually while maintaining his income and stability. This is the cognitive shift that most people never make. Most people think like poker players who believe every hand is all or nothing. You either go all in or you fold. But asymmetrical thinkers think like portfolio managers. They understand that you can make many small bets, each one structured so that you can afford to lose it, and still come out massively ahead if even a few of them work out. The psychology here is crucial. When you disaggregate risk, you lower the threshold for action. You do not need to feel confident. You do not need to feel certain. You just need to believe that the specific risks you have identified are manageable and that the upside is worth it. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever talked yourself out of something because it felt risky, but when you really examined the specific risks, they were not actually that large? Most people have. Most people have confused the feeling of risk with the reality of risk, and the feeling is almost always larger than the reality. The reason is simple. When you think about doing something different, your brain activates your threat detection system. This system evolved in an environment where risks were often life or death. A predator, a cliff, poisoned food. Your brain learned to flag anything uncertain as potentially dangerous. So, when you think about starting something new, leaving your job, learning a new skill, or putting yourself out there, your threat detection system goes haywire. It bundles everything into one category: danger. But modern risks are not life or death. Modern risks are financial, career-related, social, and these risks are almost always smaller and more manageable than your threat detection system is telling you. The asymmetrical thinker has learned to disagree with this ancient alarm system. She has learned to say, "Okay, threat detection, I hear you. Now let us actually look at what could happen. Not the catastrophic worst case, but the realistic worst case." And she does this because she understands something most people do not. Your threat detection system is not giving you useful information anymore. It is giving you information designed to keep you alive in a world that no longer exists. This is why successful people seem fearless. They are not actually fearless, they just process fear differently. They ask, what is the real risk here? And they usually find that the real risk is much smaller than the feeling suggests. A man named Robert wanted to transition from his corporate job to consulting. The feeling was terrifying. What if nobody hires me? What if I cannot support my family? What if I fail publicly? These fears felt enormous. But when Robert disaggregated the risk, he realized something. He had savings, he had expertise, he had relationships, he had a network of people who valued his work. His realistic downside was not destitution. His realistic downside was, I work as a contractor at lower rates than I wanted for 6 months while building my client base. That is not failure, that is transition. And once he reframed the risk that way, his threat detection system calmed down. He could see the situation clearly. The risk was manageable, the upside was enormous. Notice what he did not do. He did not manufacture confidence. He did not use positive affirmations or visualization. He just changed how he perceived risk. He looked at the specific risks instead of bundling them together. And that shift in perception changed his entire decision-making calculus. This is the power of disaggregating risk. It is not motivational. It is analytical. But the effect is profoundly motivational because it removes the paralysis that comes from facing one giant, undifferentiated mass of fear. The person who has mastered this skill has a massive advantage. Because most people are still operating under the assumption that risk is binary. You either face it or you avoid it. But the asymmetrical thinker knows something different. Risk is malleable. It can be shaped. It can be disaggregated. It can be managed. And once you understand this, you stop waiting for conditions to be perfect. You stop requiring certainty. You start looking for favorable odds. But here is where most people get stuck. They understand the concept. They can see how it would work in theory, but they do not actually believe it about themselves yet. There is a wall that most people hit when they try to apply the asymmetry habit to their actual lives. The wall is not intellectual. They understand the concept. They can see how it would work. They can even imagine themselves doing it. But when the moment comes to actually commit, something stops them. Something inside says, this is not for you. People like you do not do this. This is for other people. This is for people who are bolder, smarter, more connected, more talented. This wall is not logic. This wall is identity. Identity is the deepest form of belief you possess. It is not what you think you can do. It is what you believe you are. And your actions, no matter how much intellectual conviction you have, will always eventually align with your identity. You cannot sustain behavior that contradicts who you believe you are. This is why understanding the asymmetry habit is not enough. This is why knowing it intellectually changes nothing if you have not changed your identity to match it. A woman named Sarah understood the asymmetry habit completely. She had read about it. She had seen examples. She could explain it clearly to her friends. But Sarah had an identity problem. She saw herself as careful, responsible, not a risk-taker. These were the stories she told about herself, and they were reinforced by everything around her. Her parents had been careful. Her friends were careful. Her company valued careful decision-making. Caution was her tribe. When Sarah thought about doing something asymmetrical, starting a side project, sharing her ideas publicly, building something that might fail, her identity rose up and rejected it. That is not who I am, she thought. People who do that are different from me. They are bolder. They are less afraid. They are not like me. Notice what happened here. Sarah did not reject the asymmetry habit because it was a bad idea. She rejected it because it contradicted her identity. Her identity as a careful person was stronger than her desire to build something, and her behavior aligned with her identity, not with her intellectual understanding. This is the real barrier that most people face, and it is almost never discussed. Everyone talks about mindset and goals and motivation. Nobody talks about identity. But identity is the operating system. Everything else runs on top of it. The asymmetrical thinker has made a different choice about identity. Not consciously, necessarily, but somewhere along the way, something shifted. She stopped seeing asymmetrical risk-taking as something other people do. She started seeing it as something people like her do. She rewrote her identity to include this behavior. But how does this identity shift happen? It does not happen through motivation or inspiration. It does not happen through reading books or listening to talks. It happens through small, repeated actions that contradict your old identity and prove that you are capable of something different. Think about how identity actually changes in real life. A person is sedentary. They do not see themselves as an athlete or as someone who exercises regularly, but one day they start going to the gym 3 times a week. Not because they suddenly felt inspired, but because they decided to. They did not wait to become the kind of person who goes to the gym. They went to the gym, and that action changed their identity. After a few months, when someone asked if they exercised, they could say yes. And that yes was not aspirational. It was true. Their identity had shifted because their behavior had shifted. Identity follows action, not the other way around. This is crucial to understand because most people have it backwards. They think, once I believe I am the kind of person who takes asymmetrical risks, then I will do it. But that is not how it works. You become the kind of person who takes asymmetrical risks by taking asymmetrical risks. You build the identity through the action, not before it. So the question becomes, what is the smallest asymmetrical action you can take today that contradicts your current identity? Not a massive leap, a small step, something that proves to yourself that you are capable of more than your identity currently allows. For Sarah, the first step was not starting a business or launching a public project. The first step was writing, just writing. One essay, something she thought was worth saying. She did not publish it, she just wrote it. That single action took 30 minutes. It violated her identity as someone who does not create things. It made her uncomfortable, but it was small enough that she could do it despite the discomfort. Once she had written one essay, writing a second one felt slightly less impossible. By the 5th essay, the identity shift had begun. By the 10th, she had moved from, I am someone who does not create things to, I am someone who creates things. That identity shift took 2 months and less than 10 hours of actual work. But notice what happened next. Once her identity had shifted, her actions changed naturally. She started thinking about where to share her writing. She started thinking about what else she could create. She started seeing asymmetrical opportunities everywhere because she now had an identity that aligned with taking them. This is the point that most motivational content misses. You do not change your life by changing your thinking. You change your life by changing your identity through small repeated actions. The thinking follows. Ask yourself honestly, what is your current identity around risk? Around building things? Around putting yourself out there? What story do you tell about the kind of person you are? Now ask yourself, is that story true or is it just a story? More importantly, is it the story you want to keep telling? The asymmetrical thinker has made a different choice about this. She has decided that her story can change. That identity is not fixed. That the person you are today is not the person you have to be tomorrow. But this belief cannot just be intellectual. It has to be proven through action. Here is what makes this difficult. To change your identity through action, You have to feel like a fraud first. When Sarah wrote her first essay, she felt like she was pretending to be a writer. She was not a writer. She did not have the credentials, or the experience, or the reputation. She was just faking it. This feeling of fraudulence is actually a sign that you are moving in the right direction. It means you are taking actions that are slightly outside your current identity. The people who successfully change their identity are the ones who are willing to feel like frauds. They are willing to write before they feel like writers. They are willing to start businesses before they feel like entrepreneurs. They are willing to speak up before they feel like people worth listening to. They take the action first, and the identity follows. This is different from fake it till you make it, which is often used to mean pretending to be something you are not. What we are talking about here is different. You are not pretending. You are building evidence that contradicts your old identity. You are accumulating proof that you are capable of more than you previously believed. Most people never attempt this because they are waiting for permission. They are waiting to feel ready. They are waiting for their identity to shift before they take action. But that is backwards. The identity shifts when you take action. The asymmetrical thinker has learned to operate without permission. Not permission from other people necessarily, but permission from herself. She has given herself permission to be a beginner, permission to feel uncomfortable, permission to take small steps that contradict who she currently is. But there is a specific way to do this that works, and a way that leads to burnout and failure. The mistake most people make when they start to understand the asymmetry habit is this. They become small thinkers with small ambitions. They think, okay, I understand asymmetry. I should take small risks and have small expectations. They build a side project and hope it makes a few $1,000s. They learn a skill and hope it leads to a modest new opportunity. They think small and risk small, and they wonder why the results are small. This is not asymmetrical thinking. This is conservative thinking dressed up as asymmetrical thinking. Real asymmetry is not about thinking small. It is about the opposite. It is about thinking enormous while risking minimal. This is the combination that almost nobody actually achieves, which is precisely why it is so powerful. Consider the difference between three approaches to building a skill. A small thinker learns something basic and hopes for a modest improvement. A reckless thinker quits his job to become an expert in something, but is dependent on that bet being right. An asymmetrical thinker does something different. She thinks, what if I became world-class at this? What if I built something that mattered? What if this skill led to something significant? Then she asks, what is the smallest commitment required to test whether this is possible? Notice the difference. The ambition is enormous. The commitment is small. Most people separate these. You are either ambitious or you are cautious. You either think big or you risk small. The asymmetrical thinker holds both at the same time. A programmer named Marcus wanted to build a company. A big company. Not a lifestyle business or a side hustle. A real company. He did not have venture capital. He did not have a team. He did not have a clear market. He had an idea and the ability to code. A symmetrical thinker in his position would have done one of two things. Either quit his job and go all in, hoping to raise funding and scale quickly, or keep his job and build something small as a side project with modest ambitions about where it could go. Marcus did something different. He kept his job, but he thought about his side project as if he were running a real company. He was not just building a product. He was thinking about customers, about market fit, about whether he could eventually build something significant. But he was testing all of these things with minimal risk. 3 hours a week, a small amount of early customer feedback, no funding, no team, no pressure. For 2 years he did this. The project grew, slowly at first, then faster. By the 3rd year he had enough customers that the revenue exceeded his salary. Only then did he quit his job. He did not need to bet everything because he had already proven the concept. He had already built initial traction. The asymmetry was complete. Minimal initial risk. Enormous upside eventually realized. The key to this approach is understanding something about ambition. Most people think ambition is about how much you are willing to risk or sacrifice. But real ambition is about how clearly you can see the outcome you want. It is about whether you can maintain vision even when you are moving slowly. The asymmetrical thinker thinks in visions, not in timelines. She asks herself, what am I ultimately trying to build? And then she works backward from that vision to identify the smallest steps that move her toward it. She does not ask, how quickly can I get there? She asks, what is the shortest path that does not destroy my security in the meantime? This requires a specific kind of patience, not the patience of someone who has given up on ambition, but the patience of someone who has decided that steady, compounding progress is more reliable than rapid, all-in progress. Here is what almost nobody realizes about this approach. It is actually faster than going all in, not in the short term, but over a 5-year or 10-year horizon. The person who builds asymmetrically has made 3 or 4 small commitments. Maybe 2 of them did not work out, but 1 or 2 of them created real traction. Meanwhile, the person who went all in either succeeded or failed. There is no in-between. But the asymmetrical approach gives you multiple shots on goal. It gives you the ability to learn from failures without destroying yourself. It gives you the ability to think massive while staying grounded. Think about that for a moment. A woman named Jennifer wanted to build influence in her industry. Her ambition was to become known as a thought leader. But she could not take a year off to write a book or start a podcast full-time. She had a family. She had financial obligations. The symmetrical choice would have been to keep her job and give up the ambition. The reckless choice would have been to bet everything on her ability to build influence. Jennifer chose asymmetrically. She committed 1 hour a day to building her reputation. 1 hour. She wrote articles, she shared insights, she engaged in conversations. She did this consistently for 3 years while keeping her job. By year 3, she had built a genuine following. She had been invited to speak at conferences. She had been approached by publishers about writing a book. Her 1 hour a day commitment had compounded. Only after she had proven her ideas and built an audience did she make a bigger commitment. She wrote the book part-time while still employed. The book became successful. Then she had options. She could have quit her job to focus on speaking and writing. But she did not need to. She had already built enough traction that she could choose to work part-time or transition gradually. The asymmetrical approach gave her all of the upside without most of the risk. But here is where most people fail at this. They start with the asymmetrical commitment, 1 hour a day, 3 hours a week, but they do it without the enormous ambition. They are just going through the motions. They do not have a clear vision of what they are building toward. They are just doing small things. And when small things do not produce immediate results, they quit. Because there was no real ambition behind the commitment, just hope. The asymmetrical thinker is different. She is obsessed with her vision. She thinks about it constantly. What am I building? Where is this going? Who could this become? But she does not let that obsession destroy her present. She does not need to bet everything because the vision is so clear that she can move toward it gradually. This is the combination that creates real results, small bets, enormous ambition, clarity about where you are trying to go, and patience to move toward it through small compounding steps. Ask yourself, what is something you want to build that actually matters? Not a goal, not a target, but something that represents who you want to become or what you want to create. Now ask yourself, what is the smallest commitment you could make to test whether this is possible? Not the smallest possible step, but the smallest meaningful step that actually moves you toward the vision. The asymmetrical thinker would commit to that step. She would do it consistently. She would not expect overnight results, but she would maintain the enormous ambition alongside the small commitment, and she would trust that over time, this combination would produce something real. But there is a skill that separates the people who succeed at this from the people who fail. It is the ability to see opportunities that others miss entirely. There is a distinction that most people never learn, and it is one of the most valuable distinctions in the entire asymmetry framework. The distinction is between prediction and pattern recognition. Most people have confused these two things. They think they are the same. They are not. Prediction is about knowing what will happen. It requires certainty about the future. It requires that you understand all the variables and can calculate the outcome in advance. Prediction is what most people are trying to do when they say, "I want to know this will work before I commit." They want to predict the future. They want certainty. And because the future is uncertain, they stay stuck. Pattern recognition is different. Pattern recognition is about noticing recurring structures. It is about seeing that certain conditions tend to correlate with certain outcomes. It is not about knowing the future. It is about understanding probabilities based on what has happened before. The asymmetrical thinker has learned to stop trying to predict and start trying to recognize patterns. This shift is profound because it changes what she needs to know before she acts. When you are trying to predict, you need certainty. You need to know that your prediction is correct before you move. But when you are recognizing patterns, you need something much simpler. You need to see that certain patterns have historically preceded good outcomes. Then you can make a small bet on that pattern repeating. Consider a man named David who wanted to build a network in his industry. He did not know which relationships would matter. He did not know which people would eventually become valuable contacts or collaborators. He could not predict the future, but he could recognize patterns. He looked at successful people in his field and asked himself, what patterns show up in how they built their networks? He noticed something. The successful people were consistently generous. They introduced people to each other. They shared opportunities. They gave credit freely. They did not hoard information or connections. There was a pattern. David could not predict that being generous would lead to specific outcomes, but he could recognize a pattern. Generous people seemed to build better networks over time. This was not certain, but it was a pattern worth betting on. It was asymmetrical. The cost of being generous was minimal. The potential upside was unlimited. So David made a decision. He would operate asymmetrically on this pattern. When he encountered someone useful, he did not ask, "What can this person do for me?" He asked, "Who do I know that this person should meet?" He made introductions. He shared opportunities. He gave freely. The cost was minimal. The information and connections he shared were worth little to him, but potentially valuable to others. Over time, something happened. People began to seek David out. They began to think of him as a connector. They began to introduce him to people. They began to share opportunities with him. His generosity had compounded. What started as a pattern recognition exercise had become a significant advantage. But notice what he did not do. He did not need to predict that this would work. He did not need certainty. He just needed to recognize a pattern and make a small bet on it. This is how asymmetrical thinkers find opportunities, not by predicting the future, but by recognizing patterns and making small bets on those patterns repeating. A woman named Elena wanted to understand what kinds of projects led to career advancement. She looked at people she knew who had advanced significantly and asked herself, what patterns show up? She noticed something interesting. The people who advanced fastest were not the ones who waited to be asked to do new things. They were the people who identified problems and solved them without being asked. They saw a gap and filled it. This was the pattern. Elena could not predict that doing this would lead to her advancement. But she could see the pattern. She could recognize that people who proactively solved problems seemed to advance more than people who just did their jobs. So she made an asymmetrical bet on this pattern. She started noticing problems in her organization, not big problems that were someone's official responsibility, but small inefficiencies, small gaps. She started fixing them. She automated a report that was taking someone 2 hours a week to create manually. She created a document that consolidated information that people were always searching for. She did these things without being asked, without waiting for permission, without needing someone to tell her these were good ideas. The cost was her time, a few hours a week. The upside was that she was building a reputation as someone who solved problems, as someone who noticed things, as someone who took initiative. Over time, this pattern paid off. She was given more responsibility. She was promoted into roles that required exactly this initiative. She had recognized a pattern, made a small bet on it, and it had compounded. This is fundamentally different from prediction. Elena did not need to know that solving problems would lead to advancement. She just needed to notice that this pattern seemed to correlate with advancement in her environment. The asymmetrical thinker is constantly pattern matching, not trying to predict, but trying to recognize. She looks at her environment and asks, what patterns do I notice? What behaviors seem to precede good outcomes? What conditions tend to correlate with success? Then she makes small bets on those patterns, repeating. Ask yourself honestly, what patterns have you noticed in your own life or in the lives of people you admire? Not predictions, but actual recurring patterns. What do successful people in your field do differently? What behaviors show up repeatedly? What kinds of decisions seem to lead to better outcomes? Once you start asking this question, you begin to see opportunities everywhere. Because opportunities are not random. They emerge from patterns. People who recognize the patterns early get access to the opportunities earlier. This is why market timing is so difficult, but market understanding is so valuable. You cannot predict which specific stock will outperform. But you can recognize patterns in markets over time. You can see when certain sectors or styles are undervalued relative to historical averages. You cannot know for certain that this pattern will repeat, but you can make a small bet on it doing so. Here is what almost nobody realizes about this approach. It is more reliable than prediction because it is not dependent on any single outcome. When you are trying to predict, you need to be right. You need your prediction to come true. But when you are recognizing patterns, you just need the pattern to be better than random. You just need the odds to be in your favor. This is why pattern recognition is the real skill of asymmetrical thinkers. They are not smarter at predicting the future. They are better at recognizing what has tended to work before and making small bets that these patterns will repeat. But there is something else at work here. Something psychological. Because recognizing patterns requires a specific kind of confidence. Not the confidence that you will be right, but the confidence that you can afford to be wrong. Think about that distinction for a moment. Most people lack the confidence to make bets based on patterns because they lack the confidence to be wrong. They need to know they are right before they act. But the asymmetrical thinker has a different relationship to being wrong. She has structured her bets so that being wrong does not destroy her. So she can afford to be wrong frequently. She can afford to try patterns that do not work out. Because the cost is small. This changes everything. Because it frees you to actually test patterns. It frees you to say, I notice this pattern. I do not know for certain it will repeat in my situation. But I can make a small bet on it. If it works, great. If it does not, I have lost little and learned something. This experimental approach to life is what separates the people who build something from the people who theorize endlessly about building something. But pattern recognition alone is not enough. There is a psychological barrier that stops most people from acting on the patterns they see. And understanding this barrier is crucial. There is a paradox embedded in the asymmetry habit that most people never see. The paradox is this: taking small risks actually requires more courage than taking large risks. This seems backwards. It should be easier to risk small, but it is not. And understanding why is essential. When you go all in on something, you make a decision and you commit. The commitment is complete. You are in. There is no ambiguity about what you are doing. You have decided. You have jumped. You are now riding the wave. The psychology is simple. It is clear. It is almost easy because the decision is final. A man named Robert quit his job to start a business. By all accounts, this was a massive risk. He had financial obligations. He had no guarantee of success. He was betting everything. But notice something. Once he made that decision, the uncertainty was gone. He was committed. He was all in. The psychology of being all in is actually quite comfortable. You are not wondering if you should do this anymore. You are doing it. You are not managing risk. You are managing execution. But small repeated risks are different. When you commit 3 hours a week to something while keeping your job, you are not all in. You are not committed. You are experimenting. This means the decision is never final. Every single week, you have to redecide. Do I still believe in this? Is this worth my time? Should I keep going or should I stop? This constant redeciding requires something different from going all in. It requires you to maintain belief without certainty. It requires you to show up week after week without knowing if it will pay off. It requires you to tolerate ambiguity. And ambiguity is psychologically more difficult than certainty, even if certainty is about a risky outcome. This is the courage paradox. The small asymmetrical bet requires more courage than the large all-in bet, because it requires you to maintain commitment in the face of uncertainty repeatedly. Think about what separates the people who successfully build something using asymmetrical bets from the people who quit after a few months. It is not intelligence. It is not talent. It is the ability to maintain effort and belief without needing external validation or immediate results. It is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. A woman named Sarah started a project, 1 hour a day. She did this for 2 weeks and saw no results. She felt like she was wasting her time. She wanted to stop. The internal voice said, "This is not working. You should quit. Most people quit here. They say, 'I tried it. It did not work out. I am not built for this.'" But Sarah understood something about the courage paradox. She understood that the small results she was expecting were not going to show up immediately. The asymmetrical approach is about compounding, not about quick returns. So she made a decision. She was not going to redecide every week based on how she felt. She was going to commit to a time period, 3 months. She would do 1 hour a day for 3 months without changing course. After 3 months, she would reassess. This decision changed everything, because now she was not managing uncertainty week by week. She had created a container. She had made a meta-decision that removed her ability to quit impulsively. For 3 months, she was committed. The uncertainty was still there, but she had already decided how she would respond to it. By month 3, something had shifted. She had momentum. She had proof that she could show up consistently. She had small wins. She had learned things. The project did not look the same anymore. What had looked uncertain and pointless in week 2 looked promising in week 12. This is the secret that most people do not understand about building courage for asymmetrical bets. You do not build courage by being brave. You build courage by creating structures that protect you from your own impulse to quit. The asymmetrical thinker uses 3 specific structures to build this courage. The first is commitment architecture. This means creating a commitment that is harder to break than to maintain. Sarah did this by committing to 3 months. Other people do this by sharing their goal publicly so they are accountable to someone else, or by putting money at stake, or by joining a group of people doing the same thing so social pressure keeps them going. The idea is simple. Make it harder to quit than to continue. The second is meaning structure. This means connecting your small bet to something larger than the task itself. You are not just writing because you want to be a writer. You are writing because you want to build influence in your field, which will eventually lead to a book which will help people solve problems. The small task connects to a bigger vision, and when the small task feels pointless, the bigger vision pulls you forward. A man named James wanted to learn to code. Learning to code is genuinely boring. It is syntax and debugging and frustration. But James connected it to something larger. He was not just learning to code for the sake of it. He was learning to code so he could eventually build tools that would solve problems in his industry. This bigger vision made the boring task bearable. The third structure is measurement without judgment. This means tracking what you are doing without judging whether it is working yet. You are building a body of work. You are creating evidence. You are accumulating proof that you showed up. Most people quit asymmetrical projects because they are measuring against an unrealistic timeline. They expect results in weeks. But asymmetrical projects compound over months and years. So instead of measuring whether it is working yet, you measure whether you are showing up. Did I write today? Did I practice today? Did I build today? Yes or no? You track the input, not the output. These 3 structures work together to build courage. They allow you to maintain effort without needing external validation. They allow you to tolerate the uncertainty that is inherent in asymmetrical bets. Ask yourself honestly, what have you started and quit because the results were not fast enough? In most cases, you quit because you were measuring results instead of measuring effort. You were looking for external validation that your bet was working. And because that validation did not come quickly, you stopped. But the asymmetrical thinker has made peace with slow results. She understands that some bets take years to compound. She has structured her life so that she can afford to wait. She has connected her small effort to something she genuinely cares about, so that the small effort feels meaningful even when results are not visible yet. She has made it harder to quit than to continue. This is why successful people who build using asymmetrical bets seem so driven. It is not that they are naturally more driven than anyone else. It is that they have built structures that make it difficult for them to quit. They have made commitments that require them to show up. They have connected their efforts to meaning that sustains them. They have measured what matters instead of what is easy to measure. But here is what most people do not understand. This kind of courage is not heroic. It is quiet. It is boring. It is showing up when nobody is watching. It is doing something that does not produce immediate results. It is maintaining belief in the face of ambiguity. This is the kind of courage that actually builds things. Not dramatic courage, not the kind of courage that makes for good stories, but the kind of courage that compounds over years. The person who quits a good job to start a business seems brave. Everyone admires the courage, but the person who shows up at 5 in the morning for 2 years to build something while keeping her job seems unremarkable. Nobody congratulates her. Nobody tells her she is brave. But she is. She is braver than the person who went all in because she is maintaining effort and belief without the psychological safety of being all in. This is the asymmetry paradox. The small bet requires more courage than the large bet. But this courage is quiet. It is not celebrated. So most people never develop it, and therefore most people never build anything significant through asymmetrical bets. But what happens when you do develop this courage? When you do build the structures to maintain effort? What happens to your life over 10 years? Building the asymmetry habit into your actual life requires more than understanding. It requires specific frameworks and decision-making patterns that you repeat until they become automatic. Most people understand the concept, but do not know how to operationalize it. They do not know what to do on Monday morning. They do not know which decisions to apply it to. They do not know how to think asymmetrically about their actual life. This section is different. This is where understanding becomes practice. The asymmetry habit operates on 3 decision frameworks that you can apply immediately. The first is the option creation framework. The second is the skill bet framework. The third is the relationship framework. Master these 3, and you have embedded asymmetrical thinking into how you actually make decisions. The option creation framework starts with a simple question. What small commitment can I make today that creates optionality for me in the future? Optionality is having more choices later. Most people think about decisions as final. You choose career A or career B. But the asymmetrical thinker thinks about decisions as creating options. A man named David was in a stable corporate job. He did not hate it, but he also did not know if it was what he wanted long term. A symmetrical approach would be either stay and commit or quit and try something else. Both are final decisions. But David thought asymmetrically. He asked himself, what small commitment can I make that keeps my options open? He started learning specific skills related to an adjacent industry, 3 hours a week. Nothing that threatened his job, nothing that required him to commit, but something that created options. By learning these skills, he was not deciding to leave his job. He was creating the option to leave if he wanted to. He was building competence in a different domain. He was building a network in a different industry. He was creating choice without committing to anything. This is the option creation framework. Before you make any significant decision, ask yourself, what small commitment can I make that creates more options rather than closing them off? What can I learn? What relationships can I build? What skills can I develop? All without committing to a final decision. This framework changes how you approach your entire life. Instead of seeing decisions as binary and final, you see them as creating options for the future. And most of the time, the cost of creating these options is minimal. The skill bet framework is simpler. It is about betting on yourself by developing specific skills that could unlock future opportunities. The framework is this. What skill, if I developed it to high levels, would change what is possible for me? Not hobbies, not things you are interested in casually, but skills that would genuinely change your trajectory if you became excellent at them. A woman named Elena identified 3 skills that she thought would matter in her industry 5 years from now. One was technical, one was related to communication, one was related to business fundamentals. She made a decision. She would spend 3 hours a week developing competence in these 3 areas. Not becoming an expert, just becoming competent. 5 years later, when those skills had become valuable in her industry, she was already ahead. She was not starting from zero. She had already spent over 700 hours developing competence. She was not an expert, but she was far enough ahead of most people that it changed what opportunities were available to her. Here is what almost nobody realizes about this approach. It is not about being a polymath or learning random things. It is about identifying forward-looking skills and betting small amounts on them. You are not committing to becoming an expert. You are just allocating time consistently to skills that might matter. The relationship framework is the third framework. It is about building relationships asymmetrically. Most people think about relationships as either deep friendships or professional contacts. But the asymmetrical thinker thinks about relationships as creating optionality. Here is the framework. Who are 5 to 10 people who are doing interesting things in domains you want to learn about? Your goal is not to extract value from them. Your goal is to build genuine relationships. How? By being useful, by asking good questions, by introducing them to people, by following their work and engaging thoughtfully. This requires minimal time, a genuine email once a month, a coffee conversation once a quarter, a thoughtful comment on something they have shared. The cost is small, but the optionality is enormous. You are building a network of people who are ahead of you, who are doing things you want to understand, who could eventually become collaborators or advisors or friends. Most people think about networking as transactional. They think about what they can get. But the asymmetrical thinker thinks about it as building relationships that create optionality. She is not asking, what can this person do for me? She is asking, how can I build a genuine relationship with someone I admire? And she is doing the small things that build those relationships. These 3 frameworks operate together. You are creating options through small commitments. You are developing skills that might unlock future opportunities. You are building relationships with people who are ahead of you. None of this requires you to bet everything. None of this requires certainty, but all of it creates asymmetry. Small downside, potentially enormous upside. Now, how do you actually embed these into your daily life? The answer is behavioral design. You do not rely on motivation or inspiration. You build systems that make the asymmetrical behavior automatic. The first system is the calendar block. You block specific time for asymmetrical activities. 1 hour on Monday for skill development. 1 hour on Wednesday for building relationships. 1 hour on Friday for option creation. These are not aspirational. They are scheduled. They are in your calendar. They are as real as any meeting. The second system is the project structure. Instead of vague goals, you identify specific projects that align with your asymmetrical bets. Not learn this skill, but complete this online course, or read these 3 books, or build this small project. Specific bounded projects that you can actually complete. The third system is the accountability structure. You share your commitment with someone else, not because you need to be controlled, but because external commitment makes you more likely to follow through. A friend who is also doing asymmetrical work, a mastermind group, a public declaration of what you are working on, something that makes it harder to quit. When you combine these 3 systems with the 3 decision frameworks, something shifts. You are no longer thinking about asymmetry theoretically. You are practicing it weekly. It becomes a habit. It becomes how you actually think about decisions. Ask yourself, what small asymmetrical bet could I make this week? What option could I create? What skill could I develop for 3 hours? What relationship could I build? Do not make this theoretical. Pick one specific action. Make it specific enough that you can do it this week. This is where the asymmetry habit moves from idea to practice. This is where it becomes real. But there is one more element that most people miss. There is a specific way to evaluate whether your asymmetrical bets are actually working. Because not all asymmetrical bets work. Some lead nowhere. Some consume time without creating value. You need a framework for knowing which bets to keep and which to cut. 10 years is not a long time in a life. But 10 years is exactly how long it takes for asymmetrical thinking to separate you exponentially from people who never learned to think this way. This is not dramatic separation. It does not happen overnight. It happens through compounding, through small bets that accumulate, through relationships that deepen, through skills that compound in value as the world changes. To understand this, you have to see what actually happens when someone commits to asymmetrical thinking, not for months, but for years. A woman named Catherine made a decision 10 years ago. She was in marketing, competent but not exceptional. She decided to apply asymmetrical thinking to her career. She did 3 things simultaneously. She spent 3 hours a week learning skills that she thought would matter in 5 to 10 years. She spent 2 hours a week building relationships with people who were ahead of her. She spent 2 hours a week working on side projects that could potentially create value. That is 8 hours a week. It is not insignificant, but it is also not life-consuming. It allowed her to keep her job. It allowed her to have a life, but it was consistent every week for 10 years. What happened? Year 1 and 2, almost nothing visible happened. She was learning, she was reading, she was having conversations. The skills she was developing felt theoretical. The relationships were casual. The side projects were small and did not generate income. To an outside observer, she looked like she was doing the same thing everyone else was doing, working her job, staying busy on the weekends. But something was accumulating beneath the surface. Knowledge, relationships, experience, options. Year 3 and 4, things began to shift slightly. One of her side projects gained traction with a small group of customers, not enough to generate real income, but enough to validate an idea. One of her relationships deepened into a genuine friendship with someone doing interesting work. Her skills were becoming more valuable as the industry began to shift toward the areas she had been studying. But even Catherine, living through this, did not fully see the magnitude of what was building. Year 5 and 6. By now, Catherine had a decision to make. Her side project had grown enough that she could turn it into a real business. She could quit her job. She could go all in. But notice something. She did not need to go all in the way Marcus did in Section 6. By this point, her project already had revenue. She already had early customers. She already had proof of concept. She was not betting blind. She was scaling something that had already been validated. She made the move. She started her own business. By year 7, her business was doing more revenue than her corporate job had paid. By year 8, it was doing 3 times that amount. But here is what is crucial. None of this happened because Catherine was brilliant or lucky. It happened because she had thought asymmetrically. She had made small bets consistently over years. She had built skills and relationships and optionality. By the time she quit her job, the risk was minimal because she had already built evidence that her idea worked. Compare this to someone else, someone who did not think asymmetrically, someone who stayed in their corporate job for 10 years, doing exactly what they were told, never developing skills beyond what their job required, never building relationships outside their immediate network, never working on anything that might create independent value. After 10 years, what is the difference between Catherine and this person? Catherine has created multiple income streams. She has built a network of relationships that opens doors constantly. She has skills that are genuinely valuable in her industry. She has optionality. She can work for herself or work for someone else. She can pivot to something new because she has built a foundation. She has control over her time and her trajectory. The other person, they are still trading time for money. They are still waiting for someone else to give them a promotion or opportunity. They have not built independent value. They do not have optionality. If they lost their job, they would be starting over. The separation is not small. After 10 years, it is exponential. But here is what most people do not understand about this separation. It is not about being more talented or working harder. Catherine worked 8 hours a week on her asymmetrical bets. That is less than an hour a day. It is not a massive sacrifice, but it was consistent, it was strategic, it was aimed at creating a symmetry. The other person? They worked just as hard at their job, but their effort was directed toward making their employer more valuable. Their effort did not create independent options for them. Their effort did not build a skill that they could take anywhere. Their effort did not build a network that would help them if they left. Their effort compounded for someone else. Think about that for a moment. This is the real power of asymmetrical thinking. Over time, it creates exponential separation. Not because asymmetrical thinkers are superhuman, but because they are consistently building value that compounds, and most people are not. The compound return on asymmetrical thinking shows up in multiple ways. The most obvious is financial. People who have built businesses or developed valuable skills through asymmetrical bets eventually have more income and more wealth. But that is not even the most valuable return. The most valuable return is optionality. After 10 years of asymmetrical thinking, Catherine has choices. She does not have to stay in her business if she does not want to. She could sell it. She could go back to corporate work at a much higher level. She could take a year off. She could start a different business. She has choices because she has built value. The other return is identity. Catherine does not think of herself as someone waiting for opportunities. She thinks of herself as someone who creates them. This identity shapes how she sees the world. When she encounters a problem, she does not think, "Who could solve this?" She thinks, "How could I solve this?" This small shift in identity changes everything. The third return is network. Catherine has built genuine relationships with people who are ahead of her, who are doing interesting things, who can help and collaborate and introduce her to opportunities. The other person has the network they were born into, plus the shallow professional relationships they have built at work. The network advantage is massive. The fourth return is skills and knowledge. Catherine has spent 10 years developing competence in areas that matter. She is not a generalist doing everything moderately. She is someone with real depth in areas that have real value. When opportunities show up that require this knowledge, she can see them. Other people cannot. When you stack all of these returns together, the separation becomes obvious. After 10 years, Catherine and the other person are living different lives. Not because they were born different, not because Catherine got lucky, but because Catherine thought asymmetrically about her time and her bets, and she did it consistently. This is why the asymmetry habit is not a shortcut. It is not a hack. It is a fundamentally different way of thinking about how you build value over time. And the compounding is geometric, not linear. The returns accelerate as time goes on. In years 1 through 3, the returns are almost invisible. In years 4 through 6, they become noticeable. But it is in years 7 through 10 that the exponential nature becomes undeniable. The person who started small but thought asymmetrically has built something significant. The person who did not think asymmetrically is still where they started. The question you have to ask yourself now is not theoretical. It is not about whether the asymmetry habit works. The evidence is clear. It works. The question is whether you are going to commit to it, whether you are actually going to show up week after week for years without guaranteed results, whether you are going to tolerate the uncertainty and the ambiguity and the lack of immediate validation. Because this is the part that most people will not do. Most people want the results without the commitment. Most people want to know it will work before they start. Most people want the payoff without the years of small, unsexy effort. But the people who actually build something, they have made peace with this. They know that 10 years from now, they will be different if they start now. They know that the compound return on consistent asymmetrical thinking is worth the uncertainty today. The asymmetry habit is not about doing something different once. It is about building a way of thinking that shapes every decision you make. Small bets, enormous ambition, consistent effort, years of compounding. And then, one day, you look back and realize you have built something real. Something that gives you options. Something that separates you from people who never learned to think this way. But this realization only matters if you have actually lived it. And living it requires something most people never develop. There is a moment that comes to everyone who commits to the asymmetry habit. It happens quietly, often when you are not expecting it. You are working on something small, something you have been working on for months or years without knowing if it would lead anywhere. And then suddenly, it does. A door opens, an opportunity appears, a connection leads somewhere. And in that moment, you realize something that changes how you see your entire life. You realize that you built this, not through luck, not through a single brilliant decision, but through small, consistent, asymmetrical choices, through showing up week after week, through thinking in asymmetries, through the compound return of bets you made when you could not see the outcome. This is what the asymmetry habit gives you. Not certainty, not a guarantee that everything will work, but a way of living that dramatically increases the probability that you will build something meaningful, that you will create options for yourself, that you will separate yourself from people who are waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect moment never comes. Certainty never arrives. But you do not need them. You need something simpler. You need to start. You need to make one small asymmetrical bet this week. You need to commit to it for 3 months. You need to build a structure that makes it hard to quit. You need to connect it to something that matters. That is all. That is the entire practice. Over time, these small bets compound. The skills develop, the relationships deepen, the options expand, and one day you look back and realize that the person you have become is not the person who started. You are not waiting anymore. You are not paralyzed by the false choice between safety and ambition. You are building. You are creating. You are thinking asymmetrically about your life. This is not a promise of instant success. It is a promise of something better. It is a promise that if you commit to asymmetrical thinking, if you make small bets consistently, if you build the structures that support this habit, then 10 years from now, your life will be unrecognizable. The question is not whether this works. The question is whether you are ready to find out what you can actually build.